you looking for a different level of truth about your challenges and struggles? Then be a part of the Yes and podcast, hosted by empowerment strategist and trauma specialist Jennifer Whitacre. Every Wednesday, we challenge conventional thinking on topics like trauma, healing, and so much more. Learn life lessons and great nuggets of wisdom from guests who've moved through their pain and suffering to discover a new purpose in life. Now, here's your host, Jennifer Whitacre.
Hi, everyone. This is Jennifer Whitacre, and you are watching and or listening to an episode of Yes and. If you're interested in learning more about Yes and or learning more about me or what I do, go to jenniferwhitacre.com. And you can find more about my podcast. You can listen to back episodes. And today's guest is Bill Protzmann. Bill is a musician, and he's also an successful IT entrepreneur. He holds magna cum laude degrees in piano performance and creative writing, and he has concertized and performed for many years with a focus on bringing music to audiences in non-traditional ways. In 2011, Bill launched Music Care Incorporated. It's a corporation dedicated to teaching practical ways that music can be used for self-care. His work is recognized by the National Council for Behavioral Health with an award of excellence given to him in 2014, which is the behavioral health equivalent to winning an Oscar. So Bill, congratulations on that. And he's going to be here today talking about music and self-care. And he speaks with gentle conviction and from real experience. Bill, welcome to the show. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's an honor to be here.
Thanks. So I kind of want to jump right in. You're a musician. This is a big part of your life. And to the point that you have been awarded, given an award of excellence from the National Council for Behavioral Health. So how did you start to combine music with behavioral health? I mean, those are two things that the average person doesn't associate together.
You know, as you're saying that, I'm just thinking how crazy that must sound because, music is obviously powerful, but what's the National Association of Behavioral Health, doing, recognizing me? So my lane in music is enlivened by how fascinating it is to watch an audience respond.
Mm-hmm.
And being in the room with an audience that's responding to music is a rare gift. Not many people get to do that, and if you're one of the 4 or 5 people who's playing classical piano on the stages of the world, maybe that's something you feel, I don't know. But there's so many more of us who offer what we do musically, creatively, in live performance. And becoming just more than curious about why people respond has been something that's been part of my life ever since I started playing. I mean, from the very first time that I played in a piano recital and saw my teacher crying and laughing at the same time. How does that work? What's going on there? And we have research now, fortunately, but musicians have been doing this for thousands of years. They've been in rooms with people and people have responded and the musicians have interacted with them in a way. And there's something going on there. What is that something and how does it work for us? And what is the power of music really? And how can we use that? Because, oh my gosh, do we ever need help these days? Look at the crazy in the world.
Mm-hmm.
If there's something we could do to give ourselves some sense of relief from the depression, distress, and anxiety, or something we could do that would help us jump to the next level where we want to go, get out of the stuckness that we're in and get in the next place. I'm convinced there's got to be a bigger application of music,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's musicians taking responsibility for it and saying, hey, this is what's happening in the room. And some people do that, like Lizzo does that. She's amazing. But a lot of musicians still have that wall between them and the audience. And if we can bust that wall by inviting the audience in to our space, talk about what we as musicians experience with music, turns out I think that's something people can use individually. And not just as, oh, that was a great song, but hey, that song did this, this, and this for me. And every time I need those 3 things, I've got the song that I can use for that. That's where I think we need to go with this. And hey, it's free. Music is incredibly accessible now.
Mm-hmm.
You can get to almost all of it, which is
Yes.
just an amazing, overwhelming thing. without too much of a gateway. So let's do this. Let's figure out. That's been my the overriding, I guess, little spark that keeps me in the game, makes me want to know what we can do more. How can we use this stuff?
Yeah. And one thing that you said that really sticks out to me, especially because, as you know, and my audience knows, I'm a trauma specialist. So I really do see the world through the lens of trauma, what causes it and what can help it. And from what I know, whenever it comes to music therapy, which I know that we'll get into the distinction soon, but when it comes to music therapy is it's best when it's participatory. And and you mentioned breaking down that barrier between the performer and the audience, and American culture, Western culture, not just America. Music has become a spectator sport where we come together in these big venues and these big arenas, and we sit and just watch or just listen. And with the work I do, with clients, I'm having them put together their own playlists for the reasons you mentioned, like this song did A, B, and C for me. So let's put this on the resource playlist, and even have several playlists, like playlists that lift me up when I'm in a funk, or playlists that help me work through my anger, for whatever reason that is. And music does vibrate at the cellular level. It's incredibly healing. So can you talk a little bit more about how do you go about breaking down that barrier between what you do, between the performance and the audience and the person that you're working with?
So this first got started for me when I was still working on the stage with an audience. And I found that it was interesting for the audience for me to reveal my process of making the music. So I would explain something about the music that I was going to play and how it feels to perform that music, and how that's a challenge in many ways to get that emotional content to come to the place where I can put it in my fingertips and it can reach out with an authentic communication of the emotions that are there.
Mm-hmm.
And people got interested. So I began to do more and more of that, and actually bring in stories around the music that I was playing, that how that music had minded me in my life. So I have one particular show where I talk about my experience with suicide and use the music that kept me alive that evening as part of the performance, and that kind of story works well. So it began by storytelling about these things. And then as evidence built around it, we have, fortunately, the American Music Therapy Association and other immense research efforts are going into music right now. I mean, it's used in neuroscience as a trigger.
Yes.
So there's lots and lots of this evidence coming up that supports what musicians have felt all the time. And as you offer that evidence, and especially with Western audiences, they seem to relate to the fact that there's support for what the musician is doing and saying that comes from, another part of the medical community. We still are fascinated with evidence, and that's great that we have it. But once the evidence and the performer saying it are in the room, then the wall goes away, because people go, oh, you mean I don't have to play music to be able to use this? I can just listen to it and it'll change me this way. Those are fascinating things. And of course, as a musician, they're obvious to me, but they're not often obvious to people who are used to music as entertainment, for example. Once it starts to come home, like if you're doing trauma therapy and you're organizing a playlist around a response to depression or something, that's powerful stuff. But it might be new for you for the first time experiencing that. Oh, you mean I really need to feel depression and music can help me feel that and let it go without any harm? Wow, that's something.
Yeah.
So being able to say from the stage, I'm going to play this piece of music and it's been measured to have these kinds of effects. Let's see how it works for you. People are all of a sudden engaged. Oh, wow, you mean this music is going to make me do X, Y, Z? And you're like, well, of course it is. We play dance music because it makes us dance. We play happy music because we like to be happy. Why not use sad or depressing music to help us release sadness? We've been to funerals, right? Well, then let's talk about the others. What about angry music? What about music that makes you scared? There's so many ways in on this. And the beautiful part, this is where it gets so beautiful for me, is while music is a great intervention, and it lets us release depression and distress and anxiety and other things safely, effectively, at the same time, it's also doing things for us physically.
Mm-hmm.
It's doing things for us emotionally, of course, mentally, and even spiritually. So if connectivity, if oneness, if consciousness, whatever you call it, God, if spiritual growth is on your radar, that same music that's giving you the release is also inviting you to that higher level of self-actualization or transcendence or whatever it is that you long for that's bigger than just the problem of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
It does. It absolutely makes sense. And I love how you're explaining this, because you made this statement. I'm paraphrasing here, but something to the effect of, you have to feel the depression before you can let go of the depression. And that's true for any emotion. And we are pretty much in the business in Western society across the board. It's not just in our mainstream medical, like any uncomfortable emotion or sensation that we feel. You go to your psychologist or your psychiatrist, or you go, you have physical pain in your body and you go to your doctor. Those are problems we need to eradicate and problems we need to get rid of. And that's not working. If it were working, we wouldn't be in the epidemic levels of depression, anxiety, overwhelm, mental health disorders, PTSD, suicidal ideation, addiction, you name it, it's across the board. So there's a disconnect with ourself. And that's where I'm a little bit counterintuitive, not a little bit, but a lot counterintuitive in the work I do, is helping people understand that it's not running from these feelings. It's not pushing them down. It's not something to be eradicated or to let go of. It's finding the message beneath it. Like, why is it coming up in the first place? What's pushing it up? There's something underneath of it that's causing it to surface in the first place. And music, you're right, is a fantastic way to get in. And you mentioned, that music helped you when you were feeling suicidal.
Sure.
Do you mind sharing some of your personal story? Because, suicidal ideation and people completing suicide is really at disturbing levels right now. And
It is.
I think a lot of people can relate.
I'm happy to share the story. And I agree with you. We're at epidemic levels for behavioral health care right now because whatever it is that we do isn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It just simply says that it's time for something more.
Yeah,
It's time to expand our toolkit, to be able to do a better job.
exactly.
And if you have the privilege of being able to reach out to Jennifer and work directly like that, and I want to say, they used to say trauma-informed therapy. I think it's more like trauma coaching, because trauma is necessary. That's part of how we grow. We can't run away from it.
Right.
And when you get to the place of feeling suicidal, that's a symptom of something that you haven't dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
And the something you haven't dealt with, maybe like it was in my case, was stuffing those big emotions and trying to keep them under control, right? Like we know, like we can control our emotions, like we like to think we can. But over time, that chronic attempt to stuff things just builds up. And if it builds up too big, it can have symptoms. It'll leak out as anger, it'll leak out as suicide or self-harm. And that's simply, for me, an indication that there's an opportunity to go and feel something that you may have not wanted to feel, but that's actually very safe. And if music can give you that safe experience of that big emotion, then let's do that.
Mm-hmm.
So my safe experience of the big emotion of wanting to take my life started after I had done quite a bit of things. My marriage had ended. I'd had to go through bankruptcy to get the marriage done. My kids were moving off to college. My daughter had come out to me, which is a beautiful thing. All these amazing things had happened, but I just reached this point where I felt like I'd done it all. I'd done everything I came here to do, and I didn't really have a purpose, a spark, something that would keep me engaged. Even though I'd been doing music care for a long time, and I actually had a concert or two coming up, I just wasn't. I didn't feel like there was any purpose to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I recognized those feelings as something that I needed to be with. I needed to experience that. I needed to allow that stuff to be fully present. But it came up for me in a very unusual way because I had plenty of people I could call, reach out to and say, hey, I'm really feeling like I'm done here. And I'd had friends that had taken their own lives, and suicide was like just one of those options on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And the night that I confronted that option, I don't know why, Jennifer, but I decided to just sit in the chair and put on some music that had minded me, that had been there for me throughout my life. And maybe just to hear it one more time, and I can take care of this tomorrow, but for right now, I'm just gonna be with this music.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew enough about what I'd been doing to give myself permission to feel that stuff. So I put on the music, put on the headphones, put on repeat, and just sat in the chair. And as I sat there, it was a little surprising at first, but then it made sense. This overwhelming sadness came up inside me. And the music that I was listening to was pretty sad music, but I didn't think it was that sad. And what I found was that I had all of this grief that I needed to let go, that I needed to experience. I mean, you can't let it go without experiencing it. You say, "Oh, I let go of my grief." Well, yeah, but have you felt it fully? So I just began to weep, and I don't know how long I sat there just crying and listening, crying and listening. And I'd sat down at the chair around sunset, and at some point, the next thing I remember, I woke up. Music was still playing, still sitting in the chair, still alive. But I felt something different. I felt awake.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt awake in a way that was, something has changed. I don't know what. Something has changed. And I was wrung out, so I went to bed and slept. So in the process of that time, I was assembling a new show, and I knew that I wanted to tell something important in that show. I wanted to be able to bring people through an emotional journey that went down and then went up. So it's like, we're going to go to the depths and we're going to come back up to normal. And I'd gotten stuck because I knew I wanted to play this piece of music that I'd been listening to. I love it. It's a great piece of music to play. But I'd sort of run the show program into a hole where it was too deep and too dark, and I didn't know how to turn it around. So even that, the thing I love to do the most,
Mm-hmm.
I was stuck that night. Well, the next day when I woke up, there were words in my head. And that's not too uncommon. I often have a dialogue or a monologue going on up there. But this time I recognized that the words had some form. They were lyrics. And I grabbed a pencil and I started writing down the lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 4 verses and a bridge. And I'm like, wow, this is great. This is,
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. Lyrics, this is, something. And then the music came. And I started transcribing the music. It was like I could hear it in my head. I was just writing it down to match the lyrics. And by noon, this whole song was done. And I said to the universe, so I don't sing. Who's going to perform this, right? Who can I find to perform this crazy song? And I swear I heard the words just as clearly as you're hearing me now. Bill, you are. And then it hit. This song was the thing I needed to turn the corner in the show.
Mm-hmm.
To take it out of that deep place and to put it in the context of you need to do this before you do that.
Mm.
So big emotion, deep
Yeah.
feeling, the stuff that I don't like to feel but can, followed by the opposite, like the reverse of it, the way out, the way home.
Mm-hmm.
There it was. And as I said, I don't sing, but I've played that thing. And in that show, I've actually done that show a couple times, the suicide show, I call it. And I've used that crazy music and done my best to make it effective. But you know what? It works so well. And the experience of giving that show is amazing because you feel the depths. And then you feel the contrast.
Yeah.
And the way that the show moves forward from there. And it really solved everything. But more importantly, when I woke up that morning, I felt I had that purpose back. And that was the spark of what's kept me going ever since. That was 2007. Here we are 12 years later, we're still doing this. And with a deeper sense of what it's like to feel suicide, at a deep level, to know what that's like. Of course, you can't know what it's like after you've killed yourself, but to know that you can go that deep safely, that's powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's powerful.
And all of the trauma classes that I do, we talk about trauma physiology because I don't know 100% across the board. We are, if not the only, one of the only species on the planet that has the ability to sidestep our emotions and not experience them, not feel them, not let them surface and be our kind of GPS to guide us through. So
Yeah.
when we suppress our emotions, they get stuck in our tissue memory, they get stuck in our physiology, and that's what makes us reactive. That's what causes our thought processes to go off the rails that are often diagnosed as mental disorders or, mental health disorders, mental health illnesses. And suppressed emotions are often underlying a lot of physiological diagnoses, like autoimmune disorders across the board are suppressed emotions of some sort or another, cardiovascular disease, asthma. I could go on and on. And we are so masterful at avoiding our emotions, because that whole experience you talked about was finally letting yourself just delve into the feeling and the experience of it and how quickly it dissipates. And that is a true experience just across the board for people who have gone through authentic healing. Prior to this, I'm assuming you were really good at suppressing your emotions. What were some of your favorite ways to avoid and suppress and not pay attention to what was trying to surface? How did you sidestep it and bypass it all that time?
Well, I'm almost ashamed to say this, but I didn't start therapy until my early 30s. So I was carrying around all this unrealized emotion from birth until, 30 something, 3, 4.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was depression. It would leak out as anger.
Mm-hmm.
And when my first therapist on the first session said to me, "Bill, you're an angry man," I said, "Of course, no, I'm not," because I really didn't feel myself. I felt more of a depressed person, but the idea there that you could stuff emotions and eventually that practice would be harmful and get to a place where you need therapy to unpack that and figure out what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
That's an important thing to know. And I can know that in hindsight, but at the moment, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel good. If somebody had said,
Mm-hmm.
"Bill, you're angry," or "Listen to angry music," that wouldn't have resonated for me. And my job is to find big emotions and express them. So
Mm-hmm.
this process has been one of taking the emotional content that I can freely experience and express at the piano and bringing it home to a place where me, the human being without the music around, can feel and express those emotions authentically.
Mm-hmm.
And in many ways without fear of them, because oftentimes we're told, don't show your anger, that's going to be bad.
Mm-hmm.
And there's truth to that, but allowing that anger to come up and release in the moment when it happens is way more powerful
Mm-hmm.
than trying to drag around a big old tank of anger behind you all the time, which is what I'd been doing.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out that there is a difference between experiencing anger when it comes up and letting that anger control your words, your behaviors, and your actions. There
Absolutely.
is a big difference between the two.
So what we're talking about here is the safe experience.
Yes.
We're not saying be angry and then go like throw axes or something to release that anger. You haven't got that kind of time, folks. When the anger comes up, it's there for a reason. And often it's like those guardrails you were talking about. It's like, oh, if I go to the right too far, it's going to make me angry, so I should stay in the lane. But you need to bump up against it sometimes
Mm-hmm.
to feel that. And then when you feel it, the magic happens and you've got all this energy, because anger is full of energy.
Mm-hmm.
And you can choose to use that energy for good instead of having to act out on it and do something that breaks things and hurts people. So it's a great guardrail to have. And it's really odd to say to people, you can experience your anger safely, effectively, without any kind of medication. And in fact, it helps you feel more authentic. And people look at me funny. It's like, no, let's try this.
Yeah.
And here's the music. There's way more to it, because one of my favorite anger composers, you're going to love this, is Chopin.
Mm-hmm.
Frédéric Chopin lived in a time when Poland was under attack.
Mm-hmm.
Has there ever been a time where Poland is not under attack? I mean, there's always seems like somebody's after Poland for something.
Mm-hmm.
And so he, as a Polish national, was feeling this anger about the fact that his country was under threat all the time. And it came out in his music. And he wrote music that definitely is angry, but it's also transcendental. Because in addition to the anger, the big anger of the, just the monstrous piano music that he was able to write, there's something about it that opens you to the sublime.
Mm-hmm.
And so even in the midst of a huge angry piece of music, some beautiful melody will come in and remind you that, yes, this isn't all there is.
Mm-hmm.
That this anger also has this component of beauty behind it, and opens you and can open you up to that experience of something beyond anger.
Mm-hmm.
After the anger, what's next, right?
Right.
Like you say, yes, and yes, I'm
exactly
flipping angry. And what's the next thing, right? The same music.
Mm-hmm.
So even though and we're great at this, human beings we don't have like selective resonance for emotions. We make ourselves think we do, like you've said. We can choose not to feel them. Oh, but
Mm-hmm.
that's terrible. We don't have selective resonance. It's like, so Bill, only be angry. Only be angry. No, nothing else, just anger, right? If somebody comes along and taps you on the shoulder and says, Bill, I love you, don't listen, just be angry. But guess what? Our systems do this. I mean, it'd be like having a guitar that only resonated for happy. Like if you played
Mm-hmm.
anything other than happy, the guitar wouldn't resonate. You wouldn't hear it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have a guitar like that.
Exactly.
And human beings are like that too. We resonate for it all,
Mm-hmm.
provided we allow ourselves to feel it. It's very powerful and very healing for us to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I see a lot of harm in the spiritual new age community just by labeling anger, fear, sadness, grief, depression as negative emotions.
Yes.
Or it's not negative. It's not positive. Again, those are just labels that put them into little boxes, because negative has the connotation that it's wrong or that it's bad. And so people are always trying to say, let it go, let it go.
But then they don't show you how.
Exactly. Yeah. They don't show you how. And in the process of trying to let it go, we end up suppressing and pushing those emotions further away.
Right.
And again, going back to the lens of trauma, so many of us in childhood weren't allowed to express our emotions. If we expressed anger as a child, we got in trouble. Or so many of us were told, if we were sad or upset or crying, if you want something to cry about, I'll give you something to cry about, because our parents didn't understand. So again, there's a disconnect. There's a misunderstanding between what the parent is experiencing and what the child is experiencing. So kids learn very, very early that emotions are not okay. And we're not taught skills early on how to manage our emotions. We're not taught what they mean. We're not taught how to process them. So we come into adulthood with all these compensatory behaviors, all these dysfunctional behaviors.
Yeah.
And they end up being our saboteurs
Yes.
in adulthood, because they make us incredibly reactive to the situations in life around us.
So you mentioned music for depression, and we've talked about that. And I think it's very important to have specific music that helps you in each of your triggering emotions, whatever they might be.
Yes.
The big ones, depression, distress, and anxiety. So it's great to have what I call a silver bullet playlist for depression that takes you through it in an organized way that you can practice, like listening to. Because if we practice, here's a great thing about us. One of our superpowers is that we remember music.
Yeah.
It's just amazing, but we do. So once you've practiced that 4-song silver bullet playlist for depression, and you've got that kind of locked in so that when depression comes to you, you have a way of being able to allow it to process and move through. There comes a time where you don't actually have to listen to the music anymore, because your memory remembers the music.
Yes.
And when you remember music and it comes to you that way without hearing it, the research is you get the same physiological response to music you remember as music you hear. Actually get the vibrations in your ears.
Yes.
Isn't that amazing? So we have a system that, that 80% of the brain we don't use. Well, now you're learning how to use some of it.
Yeah.
It's in there. And if you can bring that back up when you need it, then you've got the release. Our bodies will respond to that, just automatically.
Yeah.
You don't have to think about it even. You just go, oh yeah, there's my depression music. There's my suicide song, right?
Yeah. That's implicit memory.
It's yeah.
Implicit.
Right?
Like it's not memory recall. It just happens. So it becomes like part of your cellular memory.
It's a built-in skill. And I laugh about this because emotional intelligence is all about, well, we got to think our way into, appreciation of the emotions. And it's actually, that's the reverse, because the lizard brain that gets the emotions going for us is doing that. And then 100 times later in milliseconds, but it takes 100 times longer for us to think about the emotional response.
Yes.
It's already in our system by the time we recognize it.
Yes.
And that's so cool. I did trauma work. So I was thinking about this the other day. There was a point in my life where, for whatever reason, I decided to go back into therapy and unwind some of those childhood traumas and just whatever was on my list. We made a top 10 list of traumas and worked through that. But I was there one day and we were doing EMDR, and you can do that with eye movement, starting the bilateral stimulation, moving your eyes left and right. Or I think we were using music that orbited between left and right that day, or just tap on your shoulders or whatever. So my therapist was taking me through processing of a traumatic memory. And we were doing EMDR. I don't even remember what the memory was right now. And I'm listening and the music is orbiting. And all of a sudden, the lights went on and I had to take off the headphones. My jaw dropped. I'm like, you won't believe the insight I've just had. And she said, well, what? And I said, well, as I'm doing this left-right bilateral stimulation thing is happening, I just realized that the first song I ever learned at the piano is a left-right song. Starting at the lower end of the piano and playing the two black notes from the bottom all the way to the top, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, all the way to the top of the piano. It's left, right. It's like bilateral stim. And I started to think about every other thing that I've done at the piano. It's all bilateral stimulation, and drummers do bilateral stim the whole time. And it's like, this is something we know. And EMDR, of course, was invented by someone who was walking around and realized that the left, right of walking was a bilateral stimulation. If you could spark that up, then you could let go of traumatic memory, let go of the energy of the trauma would dissipate. Science is still trying to explain that, but it has to do with the corpus callosum and a bunch of other stuff. Okay, that's fine, but it works. So I was saying this to my therapist, her jaw dropped. And she's like, oh my gosh. When you start to think about what we do all the time that creates bilateral stimulation, whether that's binaural beats or playing an instrument or drumming or just walking around or sitting and creating it this way, just tapping on your shoulders will do it, or slapping your knees. Wow, we do this a lot. This is a human thing. We're bipedal. We have left and right. This is what we do. And yet we're spending a lot of effort trying to stuff our trauma deep down like we don't want it.
Right.
All you got to do is connect with that emotion. And if you've got a modality that's releasing the negative charge, all of a sudden emotions lose their negative and positive, and they just become emotions. They're just there. They're just chemicals in our brain, telling our body what hormones, whatever. It's just, there's no judgment in that.
Right.
The emotion doesn't care. And here you've got a way of being able to release the traumatic memory from it. Oh my gosh. So my behavioral health care, which was non-existent from age 3 when I started playing until age 30 something when I got therapy, actually was there, because the whole time at the piano, it's my job to experience big emotions and perform them. And there I am doing that, left, right happening, bilateral stimulation happening, and the traumatic memory is just processing. It's just like releasing. I can't imagine where I'd be if I didn't have that built-in skill that I'd practiced for 30 years by the time I got therapy, right?
Right. And I want to take a moment to talk about traumatic memories. I've had, in very different scenarios, I've had similar experiences. And what I'd like to say, especially to our listeners about traumatic memories, is anytime you release the trauma, I see trauma as what happens inside of us. So it's not just the memory. The traumatic memory is actually the story you tell yourself. The traumatic memory is the I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable, nobody cares about me, I think I'll go eat worms. That's the traumatic memory. Or somebody's always betraying me, somebody's always rejecting me, somebody's always abandoning me. That's the story you tell yourself. There's always an emotion or a felt sense in the body that underlies that story. So once you can get to the emotion beneath it, going, oh my gosh, this abandonment goes back to, childhood where I was in this situation. My narrator, that story that I created in my head over my lifetime, was I was being abandoned. And what I was really experiencing was the terror of like being alone in that moment and not having anybody to turn to, because, as a little kid, that was terrifying. Or, just the grief that came up from getting yelled at because I was angry, and, not understanding why, I got in trouble because I had a normal emotion. So a lot of times there's grief underneath of it. Anger always, there's always pain underneath anger, just always. Always. So the angrier somebody is, the more pain they experience inside themselves. But anyhow, it's not erasing the memory recall of the event. It's getting beyond the story you tell yourself to start to realize that, oh my gosh, I have been keeping myself stuck with this story of abandonment, or this story of rejection or betrayal or unworthiness. So
There's so much.
I wanted to clarify that, because I
Yeah.
don't want people to think that we forget what actually happened.
Yeah, it's like it gets reframed.
Yes.
And all the richness in those traumatic moments, like when I was feeling suicidal that night, that richness is still with me.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that isn't, but I still have to confront it, is the choice to keep breathing. Sometimes that choice seems more difficult than others.
Mm-hmm.
But the richness of that moment, and what is now the richness in that music for me, is deeper than it ever was. And that's a great thing. That's a great thing. Even, I talk to people often and they say, well, what about love songs? The unrequited love song, or the love song that you had with someone who was special to you, and then you broke up, and now the song has that charge associated with it. It's like that got that sadness.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a sadness that has to run your life, and it certainly doesn't have to run your next love, but you can release that with things like EMDR. There's so many practices to be able to separate the good stuff, the stuff you want, because that music is beautiful, from the stuff that has a traumatic memory associated with it.
Yeah.
Being left is never a great thing. Being left behind never feels good.
Right.
And we're not saying that being left behind is okay. It's just that in that beautiful song, being left behind is part of that experience for you now.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's opened up that richness of love to say, yes, love can be this and love can be that. And it's okay to experience those things.
Mm-hmm.
Without having to blame somebody for being dumped, or all the other stuff that you don't want to have to process.
Right.
You can separate those things naturally. Our bodies do that. We're set up to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're lucky enough to be working with Jennifer, then she'll help you through it, because she gets this both on the non-musical side as well as the musical side, and how that works.
Yeah. Well, and Bill, you get it too. You have a coaching practice, correct?
I do. Yeah. I help people with this very thing. So
yeah. So yeah, you absolutely get it too. About what it takes to release the emotion that gets stuck in the body.
Yeah.
And it really is, it's important, and just kind of playing with the example about being dumped or being left. It's important to process this. So as we move forward, we're not projecting at the next person that we might meet or encounter that they're treating us the same way.
Yes.
And oh my gosh, that is so common, just to assume that everybody out there is going to treat you the same way that, people in your past did. And so there's so much projection.
Yeah. We've thought ourselves into that, I think.
Yes.
There's certain conventions about how human beings work, and even this one that says it's okay to experience big emotions we don't like.
Mm-hmm.
I probably shouldn't tell this story, but I'll go ahead and do it anyway. So I was on a podcast, and the host was one of those power of positive thought people.
Mm.
There was nothing that was going to make this person do anything other than smile and laugh. That was the ethos. And I'm coming from a very non-judgmental place and saying it's okay to be sad, it's okay to be angry, it's okay to feel fear. Music can do that for us, and there's no judgment on it. It's just that's what we do. We have these emotions. Yep. That's who we are. And so there was this conflict. We were at loggerheads, and I forget what it was, but I told a story about something that our music had been a deep, soulful experience for me, and I think it was related to my mom or something like that. And all of a sudden, because we were on video, I looked over, and there were tears in her eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, whatever has taken place here, it's the right thing, because not only do the people listening hear the change in tone that's happening in the conversation, if you're watching, you can actually see that there's been an impact from talking about this musical thing in a way that opened up a safe place to feel.
Yes.
So, And who knows if that was even conscious? I really don't know, because people who cry for no reason often think that they're just crying because they're happy,
Mm-hmm.
and they aren't willing to admit that there's actually other component to that may have information for them. It doesn't matter. That's fine. No judgment.
Mm-hmm.
But there was an emotional response, and I was just so grateful for that, because it's okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
it's all right.
happy oftentimes is the story we tell ourselves. Happiness and the positivity movement. I can't speak for everybody, and I'm not saying that every single person does this. I see it a lot, though, where this happy positivity movement is the means by which we spiritually bypass or emotionally hijack ourselves. Oh, I can't feel angry right now, so let's just turn it around and be happy. And then you get the Stepford wives.
Well, yeah, you
Yeah.
do.
And it's not just women. Men do
it's
it
not
too.
just women. Men do it all the time. I mean, men are
Right?
taught, like you said, don't be
Yeah.
angry, right?
Mm-hmm.
My mom was an amazing woman and taught piano right up almost until a couple weeks before she passed away. But she was a chronically happy person, and that was her choice, right? She was going to be happy at all costs. And she died of cancer. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the symptoms of stuffing your emotions for too long is that you can get physically ill.
Yes. And cancer has a lot of repressed anger
It does.
across the board.
So you know my story, repressed anger.
Mm-hmm.
Wonder where I learned that,
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that with judgment. I'm just saying that was the ethos in which I was raised. So I have to do my work to be able to move beyond that.
Yeah. And I
But
have the opposite in my family. I have the the parent that will hold it in and then just explode into this
yeah,
rageful burst. So I learned that. So I did learn unhealthy means to let my anger out. So I don't feel like I hold on to that anger for extended periods of time. And I've spent a lot of time in adulthood learning healthy ways to manage my anger so it doesn't come out in these outbursts. Sometimes it still does, and I'd like to point that out. I assume you imagine that I imagine that you experience this too, Bill, in your practice as a coach, that, sometimes we have all of these tools and we have all of these skills. And as I call it, we still lose our shit.
Yep. I mean, we're still imperfect in many ways.
Yes.
As much as we know, right? Things still bug me.
Right. We just have tools to bring our physiology and whether that's our biology or our emotions, our mental state or our spiritual state back into that homeostatic balance more quickly. And that's what's important, is how quickly can we get back to homeostasis.
Yeah, get back to like feeling normal again or something, or
exactly.
feeling energized. There's a component to this that I don't want to miss. So we've talked about music for depression and sort of managing the feelings we don't like. One of the things that is out there a lot these days are practices that are talking about resilience or respect or kindness and those kinds of things.
Yes.
And you can learn how to, say thank you and mean it. But it's interesting to me that we're not applying our superpower in that area. You know how good it feels to have somebody say thank you and really mean it? Like that's an amazing feeling. You get somebody on the phone at the call center and you've got a problem, and they just have this ability to make you feel like they really care for you in some way. And you feel it, like you get it. And they're miles away and it's a voice on the phone. How does that work? Well, for me, I like to be able to practice ahead of time so that when I have to say thank you to somebody, I'm pretty clear on how I'm going to feel when I offer that appreciation. So to do that, I soundtrack gratitude. So I'll pull together a little silver bullet list that's got songs that help me engage with gratitude on a sensory level, an emotional level. Because otherwise I'm just saying, oh, thank you. I mean, you can tell when people say thank you, like thank you for have a nice day, right?
It's like your mom standing there making you say it.
Right. But you can get to a place where if you connect your feeling, how you feel when you offer appreciation with the words, oh my gosh, that's powerful. And then when you offer your gratitude, people really get it. Like that guy on the call center who was able to really make me feel like he cared,
Yes.
I don't know whether or not he did, but I felt that. And when voice is all you've got, boy, you better make sure it's clear.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're going to offer that appreciation, we know we need that. That's like one of the building blocks of getting us out of the crazy we're in. These things, respect, appreciation, gratitude, honor, whatever. If you soundtrack that and you know what it feels like to be grateful inside because you can feel that,
Mm-hmm.
that music has opened that up for you, you're never going to be inauthentic about gratitude ever again.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then people say, well, be authentic. Well, how? Well, how can I be more authentic?
Yeah.
Well, if kindness is the thing that you want to do, let's soundtrack kindness and figure out what the music is that lets you really feel kindness. Like, what's it like when someone's kind to you?
Mm-hmm.
It's not something you think yourself into. But if you can give yourself the feeling, you'll go there every time because your body will remember that, right?
Yeah. And Bill, you're spot on about that. It's not something you think yourself into. You feel yourself into it. Yes.
Yeah. These are feelings.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can't like if you overthink feelings, you're on.
Yeah, it's not working.
Counterintuitive.
It's totally. And I mean, if you think about it as colors and you've got the primary colors on your palette there and you decide that today you're only going to paint in yellow,
mm-hmm.
but your day is all red and you can't paint in red that day,
mm-hmm.
why would you cut yourself off? Show up with all the colors and know what they're going to do. Give yourself the practice of that.
Yeah.
Like artists do. They practice with all the colors. So when it comes time, they can make the blend they want.
Yeah.
Practice with those things, using music to give yourself the emotional content that you need. And this isn't acting, people. This is genuine. This is authentic.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to dial up an emotion like, I have to feel sad now.
Mm-hmm.
No, you just know it. And being fluent, I know that's kind of a lousy word, but being fluent in your emotional language means that you have a range of feeling
mm-hmm.
that you can bring to a situation. And there are times where happy doesn't cut it.
Yes.
Like
exactly.
when you skin your knee, the last thing you want is your mom to go, be happy now.
Right.
You want a Band-Aid? You want somebody to show you a little love?
Exactly. A little compassion.
Yeah. There's a great one, compassion. So what's your compassion
mm-hmm.
music? I mean, if you're listening to this, what is your compassion music? What does it really feel like to be compassionate?
Right. And compassion is, I believe compassion is misunderstood.
Oh, completely. Yeah.
Compassion is the absence of judgment. Yeah. And a lot of times compassion gets twisted around into the helpy helperton, as I call it.
Yeah.
And the helpy helperton, whenever we have this tendency, especially women, men do it too. I see it a lot with women where we're like, oh, let me help. And then help becomes the sunny side of control, which isn't helpful.
Isn't helpful. And it misses the total emotional experience.
Yeah.
I've had to learn this too. It's harder for guys because we like to fix things. Something's wrong, we're going to find the answer, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes things are wrong in a way that there is no answer. Yeah. And in that moment, the only thing you can do is just, we like to say hold space or whatever, but you can offer compassion.
Yeah. And that's really important to put out, to like point out again, that sometimes things are wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how did you say that again? Sometimes the things are wrong in a way that
in a way that we can't fix.
Yeah, that we can't fix it. If we can't do anything about it other than to just be with it. And Brene Brown talks about this too, holding space is not, with the at least comments. Well, at least this or at least that. It's, just like, yeah, that sucks, or yeah, I've been there. And just being with somebody in the discomfort.
Imagine right now that you're Mark Zuckerberg and that your product is responsible for all of the leaking anger in the world, right?
I wouldn't be able to sleep at night.
I wouldn't either. But what do you do? I mean, there isn't anything you can, hopefully there will be things we can do, but as the guy who made the platform, there's very little that you can actually do except just say, wow, look at this mirror that Facebook is giving us for what's going on in out there. What do you do with that? You practice compassion. You find a way to figure out how to be compassionate so that you, the powerless person who runs Facebook, seriously, can be okay with that. And, Mark, if you're listening, I don't know you, but if you are, what a great opportunity to practice compassion and to come to a place where, like you were saying, Jennifer, where emotions can be non-judgmental. They're just what we do. Human beings experience emotion. And It's what we actually do with that emotion that can be harmful or can be amazing, depending upon your fluency and your safety and the way that you feel about your response to something that triggers you in a way you don't want.
Right. And in this country, in the United States, we are faced with infinite opportunities. Like, I can't even begin to talk about all the opportunities that we are faced with on a daily basis to learn to practice compassion.
Seriously.
And
that's a hard one, people. I mean, you have to allow yourself to stand in the shoes of someone that you may very well hate. I mean, violently in some cases.
Yeah.
And to try to feel what it's like, try. I mean, there's no way we can, but to come to some level of emotional awareness of what it must be like to have to be that person, whether that's your brother-in-law or one of your kids or somebody who's responsible for some big thing in the world that's happening. You know, it's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, it is.
But you have to pick up, because emotions are non-binary.
Yeah.
They're not right and wrong. They're just there.
Yes.
And that's a huge way of allowing the crazy.
Yeah.
You're just like, oh no, there's Bill. He's being Bill. And that's what's crazy to me right now. But as long as it's safe and he's not breaking things and hurting people, you can come to that and say, oh yeah, I can see how Bill could be feeling that way. It's hard for me to stand in his shoes because I don't agree with a lot of him and I don't like other parts, but I do see that, there's a reason why he's probably feeling the way he is. Right. And that's a start, right? And then your playlist comes in and you go, oh my gosh, yes, compassion music. Yes. Oh yeah, it's so easy to be compassionate for the Dalai Lama, right? Or whatever. And you start to, bit by bit, it's a practice.
Yeah.
Start to be able to build a bridge to the place where you can finally say, oh yeah, there's Trump being Trump or whatever. You know, politics is a great mirror for how we're doing in the world.
Oh my goodness.
We can pick on Trump.
Yeah, exactly. It is a really good mirror for what's happening and how collectively as a society, how we're feeling not only about ourselves and also about each other. And it's so true that, the world really is a mirror for what we experience inside of us. And when I was younger, I had a really, really hard time stepping out of those toxic, judgmental personality traits. I think there was a period of time where I don't think I was even capable of experiencing compassion.
It's hard, people. It's really hard.
And it wasn't until I started to learn about trauma and how early childhood trauma really, truly affects us that I started to understand the deeper meaning behind sayings like hurt people, because it's so true. If somebody wasn't hurt or wounded somewhere in their life, they wouldn't hurt or wound other people.
So let's talk about how you can use music with your enemy, because this could come up in business where you share a point of view with some people and don't with another, and you have to work together as a team anyhow and still move forward. And it might be something that's project-based, where both of you have your separate ideas of how to achieve something, and they're both valid, right?
Yes. Or
it could be something as radical as red and blue, whatever the enemy situation is, there's a way forward. And it's often a way that you don't know. It's not an either or situation. I like to say that in chess, you can win, lose, or draw. And often the strategy is to play for the draw. And that's a valid strategy. So if you and your enemy are in a place where you're locked up, one of the ways forward is to find a piece of music to discuss. Because what's missing in that enemy standoff situation is the human connection, it's the bridge. If you can make the human connection, you can move forward. But oftentimes we just get to a place where we're fighting, we dig trenches and shoot at each other instead of trying to find a way that allows us to move forward. So in that kind of a place, I often like to get together on a piece of music. It's like, hey, Jennifer, I heard this song the other day by Trumposaurus. We've got to go to this concert. It was live. What do you think? You've never heard this before. I've heard it once. Can we talk about this song for a moment? And you're going to look at me funny because it's like, well, who's got the time for that? But if you're stuck and you have to keep moving, there's no way you can move together until you agree on something.
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes getting into a song, the first thing will happen is, oh, I like that song and I don't like that song, right? So, and notice that I'm using the contrary expressions here.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that song, or I don't like that song,
Mm-hmm.
right? So for emphasis, that's how disconnected it can be.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, well, okay, well, what don't you like? What does it make you feel? Like, what about Trumposaurus is not giving you the warm, fuzzy feeling that you want right now?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and then you begin to dig into that. And as you both dig into a piece of music together, you find that the communication goes from opposition to understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And you start to understand why it is that somebody has the feeling that they do about a song. And they understand why you have a totally different feeling about the same song.
Mm-hmm.
And both those feelings are okay because you're both just feeling things, right? And there's no way that you can be judgmental about that, because suddenly you're in a place where you're like, oh, well, Bill feels this way, Jennifer feels that way. And it's the same music and I can listen to it. Maybe I'll feel a third way or whatever.
Yeah.
And you start to begin to build a bridge.
Yeah.
And in business, it's so hard anymore to build bridges. Human resources just pushing on people, isolating people.
Yeah.
It's the only way we can keep each other safe in business, from the Me Too movement, all that. Oh my gosh, music is a great way to come back together.
Yeah. And I love how you described that, because you're shifting the conversation from judgment into curiosity.
Yes.
And
yes.
Curiosity is the path away from judgment into compassion. Curiosity is the link between the two. I love that you brought that up, Bill. Thank you.
Well said. Oh my gosh, we're on the same page here today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And allowing that. So you'll get back to the linear thing that you need to accomplish, the task, whatever, that'll come. But taking a moment, to get out of the space. And it doesn't take any skill. I mean, really, guys, we know how to do this.
Yeah. It's taking the time. It's just taking the time to slow down and learn to be okay with yourself in those quiet moments. But so many people, again, don't like to be with themselves. Some of the things that we fear the most are public speaking, death, our own mind. People will do anything possible to get away from experiencing what's going on in their own mind. They'll drink wine. They'll go for a run. They'll go take a hot bath. They'll, go do yoga, anything to keep them from being in their mind. And that's where it's even more important to go inside yourself and look at your motivations. Not that there's anything wrong with going for a run or doing yoga or taking a hot bath. Look at your motivations. Why are you doing it?
Yeah. And so when you do that, when you open up to that, it's there. It's like, I've never had to worry about it for very long.
Yeah.
Once you open that door, it's kind of obvious. You'll get this flood of emotion that just overwhelms you in many cases, like it did for me that night. But that's good information for you. And not in 1, 2, 3, here's your to-do list of stuff. Thanks to listening to this music, you now are clear about the X things you have to do. It's not like that. What it is emotional clarity and a sense of relief and a sense of power that doesn't come from any kind of a checklist. It's not linear at all.
Right. And I love that. And don't apply linear thinking to these concepts because they're not logical. Yeah, exactly. They're not linear.
We've done that.
Yes, exactly. So Bill, we're close to being out of time today.
We are.
Yeah. So if any of our listeners are interested in looking you up, where's the easiest or most prominent place to find you online?
Best place is to go to quest.musiccare.net. So Quest is the old-fashioned quest for the Holy Grail spelling with Quest. .musiccare, 2 C's.net, because it's a network of people. It's a movement. And we need to engage in this movement in a way that's going to take us to the next place. Because look where we've gone, with the binary movement and the greed movement and the competition movement. So this is a collaboration between me and everybody else who's out there who can accept music more as a tool and less as entertainment, to bring it in and let it enliven what we do. Quest.musiccare.net. There's free stuff. You can find me there, and it's the tip of the iceberg.
Okay. Well, I'll throw that up, and then I'll also put your Facebook, LinkedIn
Sure,
links
yeah.
up. So those will be in the show notes. So if anybody wants to find the show notes and find other links somewhere to get in contact with Bill, you can find that on the blog post, which will be on my website under the Yes and podcast at jenniferwhitacre.com. And that'll go up next week on Wednesday. So, Bill, before we finally sign off today, do you have any final tips or bits of wisdom to leave with our listeners?
Like I'm wise.
You are wise. You've said a lot of wise things today.
Oh, no, anybody can be wise. You just have to learn from your experiences, right? The simplest thing that I found learning from my experience is that change your music, change your life. So if you allow your openness to music, you'll also allow your emotional richness to come into play, and that will change your life. So it's like, an all sugar diet, not a great thing. So change your music, change your life.
Wonderful. Well, Bill, it's been an honor to have you with us today. Thank you for being with us on Yes And. And again, if you're looking to learn more information about me or the podcast, you can find that at jenniferwhitacre.com. I will see all of you next week.
We have just concluded another episode of the Yes And podcast with Jennifer Whitacre. For additional resources, please visit our website, jenniferwhitacre.com. Leave a review if you enjoyed the show and find it useful. Until next time, continue challenging conventional thinking and keep moving forward.